We got a bidet! Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's Shoot the Sheev, we are talking about a topic, not necessarily like a movie like we have been recently. And we are exploring the idea of, is Rey from the sequel trilogy, is Rey a Mary Sue? Now, we don't want to get too far down the line. I'm sure everybody has their own opinions about that question in particular. However, we do want to kind of talk about what is this definition of a Mary Sue. Sometimes it's considered a derogatory term, just depending on, how you're saying it and trying to justify things. But it's definitely been something that has floated around in the talks of Star Wars characters, especially for sequel trilogy. So what we want to do is we want to talk about, what is it that defines what a Mary Sue is, and then talk about some other examples that are also brought up outside of Rey. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Rey. We're going to talk about, what did she go through? It is what she went through earned, or do we believe that it's kind of in that idea of being a Mary Sue? So let's kick it off with the definition. So all I did is I typed into Google. I said, what is a Mary Sue? And Google is telling me it is a type of, they're saying it's a type of female character who is depicted as unrealistically lacking in flaws or weaknesses. So one thing to point out here, Google is assuming that a Mary Sue is being directed at a female based on the name and in the term, or phrase, I should say. And
so I also looked this up on Urban Dictionary, and I'll get to the definition comparison later after we explain yours a bit more, but they do mention that sometimes for male characters, they're called a Marty Sue or a Gary Sue.
Interesting. I wonder what the Sue part of it is, so universal amongst the terms. But yes, that's kind of what I was leading towards was that they're not just female characters that are talked about in this sense. The idea of being a flawless character and just being good at what you do is not just females. It's also males. And when I was looking up a list of examples, I was surprised to see certain names on there that were listed. So do you want to do your comparison first, and then I'll talk about some examples?
Sure. So the way Urban Dictionary defines it is a character who is so perfect that he or she warps the world around them to display their own perfection. So it makes everybody else around them seem kind of unreal because, or like something's different because this one character is so perfect and flawless and loved.
Interesting.
It says the people around them defy logic to simply display how amazingly radiant they are.
So between the two that we mentioned, it kind of sounds like it's basically a character, doesn't matter what gender. It is a character that when you look at the overall picture of the story that they are in, they are seen as, again, flawless. They seem to stick out like a sore thumb compared to the other ones in terms of they can't do any wrong. Or how else would you say that?
Well, it's later on in the definition, I forgot to mention this. It says sometimes in order to make a character seem less Sue-ish, the author will often give their Mary Sue a flaw that is actually just a stale trait in disguise. And so there's very many or a lot of different subgenres of Mary Sue's.
Hmm. Interesting. This is totally random, but Sarah and I watched this show called The Middle. Do you kind of wonder if the Sue character is like a play on this because she does almost all like everything that can go wrong happens to her?
Yeah, it almost kind of seems the opposite because she's completely not perfect, but in some sort of a way she is because she's always happy.
I just thought it was kind of funny that, the one thing that was in common with all the ones you said was the Sue part of it. And then thinking about these people are always perfect. And then there's this character called Sue in the show we watch, and just all this terrible stuff happens to her. Um, it was kind of an interesting thought. So I do want to bring up some of the examples that I found. And this is from dictionary.com. And basically, what I did is I said, what are examples of a Mary Sue? And one of the first ones that came up was the article from dictionary.com explaining the term and some examples of it. Here's where it gets interesting. So it does talk about Ray a little bit. So obviously, like I told you, people are talking about Ray in the sense of being a Mary Sue, and that's what we're talking about today. But some other big characters that people are aware of that are listed is Harry Potter. So Harry Potter is a Mary Sue, or one of those other terms that Sarah mentioned that sometimes are used for guys. Gary Sue, I think, is one of them you said. Um,
Yeah, so let's talk about him for just a hot second here. He is somebody who, although a lot of things kind of go wrong to him and his friend group, he somehow always finds a way to escape virtually unharmed.
mm, yes and no. I mean, he does at least get bruised and bloodied a good handful of times. Um, but I mean, he is the boy who lived. So he is already, even just by when he's a baby, he is separated from all his peers as far as, being this very important being amongst his friends. So, yes and no. I mean, I would kind of argue in the Harry Potter world that he had, 8 movies of learning some things. Like, I want to say there was times where he failed and he had to learn from it, but I also don't recall all this stuff. I know in the first movie, which is I think my second favorite. My first favorite is Chamber of Secrets. In the first movie, him and his friends are assuming something and being very naive about their situation with thinking who's the one trying to, go out of their way to kill Harry. And then through their blindness, they eventually find out that the person they thought was trying to kill him was trying to save him. So, I mean, there was some flaws and some flaws and whatnot in that film. But I mean, I guess as far as the separation, I can see that. The next one that I saw, you probably would know more about it than me because I actually didn't like deep dive into this movie or book. But you at least had posters when I first met you of this movie, and it is Katniss Everdeen. She is known as being a Mary Sue according to dictionary.com.
She is overall pretty well liked by most people and always is able to overcome. I mean, she also is the girl that lives, if you will, because she makes it through all her different trials. Spoiler alert. If you
Well,
I mean it's pretty obvious she's in all the movies.
yeah, if she's on the poster for the final film, that's kind of like a spoiler for all the rest of them.
Yeah. But I liked her character.
I liked her character. I didn't really like for both Katniss and Harry. I would not say that there was as much backlash as there was for Ray. And we'll probably talk more about that in the later sections, because I think what the reason why that Ray gets so much um, discussion about being a Mary Sue is that she's in reference to all the other things that happen in Star Wars, and there's so much. that
I
happened.
found a really cool chart comparing her to two other Star Wars characters for different characteristics that define if they're a Mary Sue or not.
That'll be good in the further down this discussion. However, the third person that is listed as an example, and there was only three in my very quick glance of examples of Mary Sue's in dictionary or on dictionary.com. The third one is Luke Skywalker. And I find that very interesting because a lot of times when the discussion is about Rey being a Mary Sue, there's a lot of things that Luke went through and other characters in Star Wars that are used as a comparison to Rey, saying they aren't a Mary Sue because they did this, and that, but she is because of this, and that. And it's interesting that some people believe that even Luke was a Mary Sue to a point. But I do want to expand on that a little later. Looks like you wanted to say something.
I was just gonna say he's one of the ones on my chart
Interesting.
to compare.
Yeah, there's definitely some things. And again, I don't want to talk too much about it in the intro. We're gonna get through this in a minute here, so we can get into the juicy stuff.
All of these characters have been main characters.
Yeah, like we said, Harry, Katniss, Luke, Rey is definitely arguably the main character in the sequel trilogy. I do think, we focus on the light side of the movies, but I would also argue that Kylo is probably one of the main characters of the sequel trilogy, even though we see significantly more of Rey. Is there anything else you wanted to say in this little beginning section before we move on and start talking some deep dive?
So without going into each of these characters on this chart, I'm just going to touch on some of the characteristics that this particular, the website's David Anderson, the author. I don't know who that is, but that's the website I'm pulling this chart from. So, characteristics for a Mary Sue, according to this website, would be: are they overpowered? Do they have an unexplained power level? Are they perfectly good? Are they lacking or have no personality? Are they instantly liked? Does it feels like wish fulfillment? I'm not entirely sure how to interpret that. How would you interpret that? Feels like wish fulfillment.
I have no idea. We probably have to talk about the chart and see what the comparisons are for each of them, maybe.
We can try. We'll get there. But the last characteristic is not embarrassed and fails. Or not embarrassed / fails. Like they don't fail or they're not embarrassed when they do fail. Not entirely sure how to incorporate that one either. But those are the different characteristics that this other website considers to be characteristics for a Mary Sue. So I just thought I'd kind of throw that in there as another angle to look at when you're discussing, is a character a Mary Sue or not, and trying to see, from all different lenses, what actually is a Mary Sue. That way we can make a better educated decision.
Yeah, and we will doing some deep dive discussion when we get there. So that is this little beginning part. Again, we just wanted to emphasize a little bit here in the beginning. We're gonna be talking about Rey from the sequel trilogy. We're gonna be analyzing the different aspects of her character and see if she does fit the Mary Sue description in our opinion, or are there some other things that haven't been considered that maybe push her towards not being a Mary Sue. So we talked about what is a Mary Sue, some other examples, so we have some comparisons, and then we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to start talking about Rey and her character and just talk about what happened with her in the sequel trilogy. And then later on, we're going to talk about how she compares to the descriptions that we just talked about with being a Mary Sue. So stick around. Have you seen The Mandalorian? Do you wonder what Operation Cinder was that they mentioned in this show? Well, we got you covered because we have an entire playlist dedicated to the Star Wars Battlefront 2 campaign, which highlights Operation Cinder. So if you check out our playlist, you'll be able to see what actually happened with Operation Cinder and know what they're talking about with the show. Now back to ours. Welcome back, everybody. We are now here in the second segment of Is Rey a Mary Sue? In our first segment there, we kind of talked about the definition of it and some other examples outside of Rey, who we are analyzing in this video. And so with this second segment, we want to go ahead and just talk about the character of Rey in general. We need to have an understanding of who this person is before we start analyzing them, right? So Rey was a character that was introduced in The Force Awakens. And when we meet her, she's kind of this loner character on the desert planet of Jakku. She's making her way through life, and she has, this hope of one day her family will return to find her, right?
She's not very well off. Like, she's very poor.
Yeah, she's poor, but she seems to know how to survive. Like, she knows some of the good places to find junk so that she can trade for rations or food, so to speak. Portions is what they think they called them in the movie. And she just kind of lives her day-to-day life of finding scrap, trading it for food, rinse, repeat the rest of the way. Until one day she meets, Finn, who gives her an opportunity to leave Jakku and do something bigger with her life. And through their running away, they eventually run into Han Solo, which is basically Rey's connection to the Resistance. We're all kind of led to,
BB-8 is who's connecting her to the Resistance.
I guess that's an opinion. I was going to say Finn, was kind of her start, but he wasn't part of the Resistance. It wasn't until they got to Han Solo that they were actually able to go somewhere and seek them out. BB-8 couldn't drive a ship. But, so she eventually meets up with the Resistance and decides to join them and, help them out against the First Order. And somewhere down the line, when they're, attacking the Starkiller base, Rey has this altercation with Kylo Ren, which is where we first see our big connection. Well, I guess we had the vision when she touched the lightsaber. It was kind of our first impression that she might be kind of special as far as being a Jedi. But it wasn't until later on where she's fighting Kylo Ren where we get kind of that confirmation of there's definitely something going on here, and the saber is calling to her. We know that Maz is actually telling her that, it calls to you, is her words that she says to her. So that's kind of what we get from her character in The Force Awakens. It isn't until The Last Jedi where she meets Luke. Did you want to cover what Rey goes through in The Last Jedi?
Sure. So she meets Luke, saying that she needs his help. He doesn't want to have anything to do with her at first, so she kind of tries to train herself. And I think through that, he kind of has maybe some small amount of guilt because he sees that she needs some help. And so, they do a little bit of training, not a whole ton, really. She does some lightsaber training kind of on her own, and I think the training with Luke is kind of more like mental or mind training, to, have a proper mindset for a Jedi, because he's disturbed by her going straight to the dark side in her vision and not being scared of it. And then I'm gonna pass it back to you on what happens next. Sorry, my mind's going blank.
Yeah, so she interacts with Luke a bit, and she, learns that although, well, she learns about the past of the Jedi, and she's starting to become attuned to her own abilities with Luke. She eventually is learning that she has a connection with Kylo Ren, so she's starting to uh, deter from what Luke would want her to be going through, if that's the way to put it, because she kind of starts to get an opinion of her own of what she needs to do to help the Resistance and quote unquote save Ben Solo from the dark side, which is an interesting mirror to Luke's ambitions when he was younger. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that in the third segment. But she goes off, she fights, or not she fights, she meets with Kylo Ren and Snoke aboard Snoke's ship. And Kylo basically shows Rey that he wants to be partners with her in ruling the galaxy by killing Snoke himself and then fighting off all the Praetorian guards with Rey. Mind you, all of this is happening over the course of like a week or so. So from start to finish that we've talked about so far, this has all happened in a very, very short amount of time. Eventually, Rey escapes and goes to Crate, where she gathers all the resistance. And unfortunately, Kylo is led to believe that Luke is actually there when he's not. And so Rey is able to get the resistance away. So that's the end of The Last Jedi. The last piece of information that we know from the films is from The Rise of Skywalker, which takes place 1 year after The Last Jedi. I just looked that up. And so in The Rise of Skywalker, it seems like Rey is a bit more attuned to her abilities. She's been reading the sacred texts, and she's also been training under Leia. So we get a little bit of information on Leia of why she would be, worthy, quote, that's not really the word, but
Didn't
able to
didn't
train
Luke
Rey.
Luke burned the sacred text, didn't he?
He thought he did. If you watch at the end of The Last Jedi, when all the resistance are on the Millennium Falcon and Finn is like rifling through the drawers, the books are in there.
Oh,
She
weird.
she took them. That's why in The Rise of Skywalker, she said she's been studying the books, which is how she learns about the Wayfinder
Mm.
and Exegol. But yeah, so she's been training with Leia for about a year after The Last Jedi. Her abilities seemed quite improved between The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. And there really isn't much progress, I would say, within Rey for The Rise of Skywalker. It's more of she's here and she's going to stay here. She's trying to just fend off the First Order with what she's got and the Emperor eventually at the end. There's one other big thing I wanted to mention. Oh, yeah, and Rey taps into a little bit of the dark side in Rise of Skywalker when she uses Force Lightning. So we have a whole bunch of stuff that we saw with Rey, but I think the most interesting thing about this is, like I said, with The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, that took place over the course of about a week or two. I think that might be even stretching it a bit. And then The Rise of Skywalker happens 1 year after The Last Jedi. So all of Rey's arc that we basically see in the sequel trilogy is a little over a year in time frame. So, thinking about yourselves, if you think about, when I was a junior in high school and I went through class, you think about how much you learned between being a junior going into your senior year. That's about how much time that Rey had to learn all the stuff that she learned in the sequel trilogy.
I will say, I'm gonna give her this one piece of credit here. She had her staff long before this first movie. Like, she's clearly been using this staff for a long time, and staff style combat is not totally that different from lightsaber combat. I'm not going to say they're the exact same, but they're similar enough that I think the skill would be somewhat transferable. It wouldn't be like somebody picking it up for the very first time and having no experience.
I would say that's a fair assessment. But I would also say, you know, Rey has had her encounters with Kylo quite a bit. You know, someone that should be as strong in the dark side of the Force, uh, although she, has the skills she has with her staff. Uh, I don't know if I would say that's enough to go up against somebody that's strong in the Force, as opposed to just basically a human character going up against a Force wielder, so to speak.
Sure.
So there's kind of some of that disconnect that happens with assessing whether or not Rey is considered a Mary Sue. Let's see. So yeah, that is about it from the movies. I really don't think there's much that expanded Rey's character in the video games, because I know she was in Battlefront 2, but it was just to use her as a character. We didn't learn anything about her. There's a handful of the books that the one that I read that I can draw back on a little bit was, I think, Shadow of the Sith is what it was called, where it features Luke and Lando on the cover, and Ochia Bestoon is also on the cover. And this talks about Rey's parents and how she was dropped off so that these like dark sorcerers don't get their hands on Rey, because they're searching for her. Well, her and Ochia Bestoon, they're all trying to hunt for her, and that's why she was dropped off on Jakku. Because they know that these people were chasing her parents, hoping it would lead to her. So we don't get much there either. We just kind of know that she is a Force wielder from The Force Awakens, and we know that she gets a little bit of training from Luke, and then about a year's worth of training from Leia. Anything else you want to throw in there about Rey's background that we saw on film?
I feel like we covered it pretty well in terms of, training and ability and, where she came from, where she went. Uh, I guess from like a social aspect, instead of, we talked about kind of like her physical attributes in terms of like power level and training and stuff. Uh, Socially, she is pretty well accepted by her peers. She's very intelligent, like how she was able to fix the Millennium Falcon without needing a whole ton of guidance. She, being a scavenger, she's used to scavenging parts and kind of knowing where things came from at least. But the ships that she's scavenging aren't running, so I'm not sure how well that really translates to being able to fix a running ship. You can kind of say, but I mean, it's like this is going to be a really wild comparison, but it's like when I was in school, I missed the frog dissection day. I know this is really wild, but so what I did was like the computer version. You can't tell me the computer version of a frog dissection is the same thing as like a real life frog dissection in science class. So for her, used to scavenging ships that haven't run in years because they've been in these sand hills, and then now she's able to fix the Millennium Falcon right away. I'm sure some of her skills translated, but that's a pretty big jump to make.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if she ever like toured the ship or, poked around it, maybe like stole a part or something to sell to Unkar Plot. I don't know. I guess that's all stuff to maybe ask Disney someday, or if they'll explore it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we did a pretty
I don't
decent
know if
job
there's
of,
really any characters that don't like her.
I mean, Luke was Luke in episode 8, but I don't think that was like directly at her, so to speak. It was just him being a grouch.
Yeah, I think he just more or less like, I don't know you. I don't care about the resistance.
Arguably, Poe has like butts heads with her a little bit in Rise of Skywalker because he's always like, we need you out there and you're just sitting here doing your little Jedi studies. We need you on the basically at the battlefront,
That's
and
fair.
she's not doing that. So, I mean, that I think is the most of a stretch we're gonna get out of characters that have a quote unquote problem with her.
Sure.
Yeah, because Finn is all about Rey, clearly from all the times that he screams for her. Um,
BB-8 likes her. Leia seems to like her. Even Kylo wants to be friends with her.
yeah, I think the only people that don't like her are the ones that aren't supposed to. So, like Snoke, for example. But I
Yeah.
don't really think that counts personally. So,
Well, he wanted her to embrace the dark side and join him, right?
probably. I know he wanted to see her. He like bring me the girl kind of a thing.
Yeah. But anyway,
Yeah, so we just covered Rey's character, like what's our understanding, what do we know about her from the films, a little bit from the books. There's really nothing from the video games that we can bring up here. So when we come back, this is where the deep dive starts. So look forward to it. Stay tuned. Have you ever wondered what Amazon coffins are and what they're full of? Well, we got you covered here on the channel. Check out our playlist of our Amazon coffin unboxings where Sarah and I open up boxes that have Amazon returns and we share with all of you what we get in each of those boxes. If you ever wanted to get into liquidation and want to know what types of things you can find, check us out. Now back to our show. Welcome back, everybody. Here we are going to really start to deep dive on Rey's character. We've talked about what is a Mary Sue. We've talked about who is Rey and what do we understand her to be from the movies, books, and video games. And Sarah mentioned before that she had a chart from a website. She can let us know what that is in a minute. Excuse me. And we're going to kind of go through those questions that she read on the website, and we're going to talk about those questions. We're not going to say what the website said that they believe. We're going to talk about our interpretations of what is going on with these attributes that a Mary Sue could have and compare it not only to Rey, but Sarah mentioned that there's two others on there that we also get to throw in the mix, which probably, once she tells us who they are, probably will make sense as to why they're picked, and also a good way of understanding whether or not Rey should be considered a Mary Sue. So, what you got? What is the website again? And tell us the three characters, and then what your first question is.
yeah, so the website was from David Anderson, theauthor.com. This was an article he wrote in June of 2022. The three characters are Luke Skywalker,
Which we mentioned.
Anakin Skywalker, and then Rey Skywalker. I'm going to use air quotes on that one because I don't necessarily agree with her being called a Skywalker, but they do call her that in the series, in the movies.
I say I do not either.
So, yeah, so I'll go through each of the traits and we can kind of talk about whether or not we think those three characters fit in those buckets. I am going to skip the last two of them that I mentioned earlier. The feels like wish fulfillment and not embarrassed slash fails, just because I'm not entirely sure how to interpret those or what this author website meant by those. So we're just going to skip over those. So the first one is the character overpowered? So starting with Luke and then going to Anakin and Rey. What do you think?
So, is the character overpowered? I would say no. I guess I should say who I'm talking about. Luke, I would say no. I don't think he's overpowered. Thinking about the original trilogy, he was not able to beat the Emperor. Luke did not defeat the Emperor. It was Vader that did it. So I would not say that Luke is overpowered. If that kind of falls into the flaws. Luke does not have the ability to, beat everybody. He is not the top guy in the galaxy as far as power. So I would not say that he has crazy amounts of power. Anakin, I wouldn't say either. He is very strong, don't get me wrong, but I wouldn't say that he's overpowered. You got to remember, so like if you put Anakin into perspective, he trained in the Force for years, and I mean years, in comparison to Luke and especially Rey. So I think Luke, I don't know how many years. Let's see, look it up real quick. How many years between A New Hope and Return of the Jedi? So 3 years between A New Hope and Empire, and then Jedi is 1 year after Empire. So 4 years total. So Luke was in some sort of Jedi training for 4 years. So by Return of the Jedi, that's where he's at. Anakin, he trained since he was like 10 years old, all the way up to probably drinking age. I don't know, 21, something like that. Rey, as we just talked about a second ago, she did her training over the course of just over a year. So, what I say for Anakin, no, I wouldn't consider him overpowered. Very strong, but not overpowered. Luke, I definitely don't think he's overpowered because he is not, like, he actually has to learn. In episode 5, he, misread his power, his ability, and he got kicked around by Vader. And then in episode 6, he wasn't able to defeat the Emperor. Vader had to do it. So I'd say no for Luke. Rey, I would say I would lean more towards yes, but there's a weird issue with Rey, and here it is. So yes, Rey only did her training for a little over a year. When she meets Snoke, which is within a week or two, okay, of her meeting Finn, going on this thing and meeting Kylo Ren, touching the saber, all the stuff that happens in The Last Jedi, all of that is over a couple of weeks. In The Last Jedi, Snoke does mention, and this is kind of the band-aid over the problem, so to speak. He mentions that as Kylo gets stronger, so does the light side. And we know that Luke cut himself off from the light side. So where is it going to funnel? Well, the Force is going to go towards whoever is like seriously tapping into it and trying to be strong with it. Because they say everybody is part of the Force, right? Because it's what binds the galaxy together. But it's those that actually tap into it and try to strengthen their bond with the Force are the ones that become Jedi, and they can start doing all these magical things. So Snoke's little explanation of, as Kylo gets stronger, so does Rey, is kind of the sequel trilogy's way of getting away with saying that Rey can be so powerful so quick. That, in my opinion, is kind of an excuse to let her be so powerful.
Well, the next line that we have here, and I'm going to bring us into this one because it ties heavily into what you're discussing right now, is unexplained power level. So we were talking about being overpowered. Now it's an unexplained power level. So was she overpowered? I would say yes. Is it an unexplained power level? It really kind of is. I mean, I
I'd
hear
say
what you're
yes and no.
saying, but it's kind of an excuse. We'll give her like a half check for that, I guess. Like a halfsies.
Yeah. So I would agree. I would say she's a bit overpowered, especially between Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. And that one line that gives us this little bit of information, I think that's You said
Unexplained
unexplained.
power
Yeah,
level.
I would consider that to be the unexplained power level. Like it does and it doesn't for me. Um, as far as the other two in comparison to Rey, Anakin had an explanation. They talked about midichlorians. I don't give a rip if people don't care about midichlorians. It's a thing. He said, George Lucas said, when you have these midichlorians, when the count is super high, that's what really starts to, bring out the force powers in people. Um,
I
so
feel like that explanation makes more sense as compared to Rey.
yeah, I mean, and also it's kind of a funny backhand to Disney, but the one that makes sense came from the man himself, George Lucas. And the other ones, they had what? They pumped this movie out within 2 years after The Force Awakens, so they had to get something going really quick. So
Yeah.
yeah, it seems like a band-aid on the situation.
To elaborate, because I don't want it to seem like we're just hating on Rey. Um, to elaborate on why I say it seems like it makes more sense. This is at least an excuse for why he himself is overly powered. He's got it's like a superpower have or a superhero having extra of the thing that makes them a superhero, right? So he has that extra high midichlorian count, whereas with Rey, you're telling me there's no other Jedi anywhere that are tapping into this, so all of Kylo's energy is going directly to her and nobody else. Like we've seen Finn kind of has a calling to the lightsaber a little bit. We've seen that there was that one kid that did the trick with the broom where he brought it to himself. So there's clearly lots of other people that have little bits and pieces of this. You're saying nobody else is doing this except for Rey? It seems pretty hard to believe.
I say that would also be my interpretation of it as well. Because like with the dark side, there's only a few people. There are not dark side people all over the galaxy. Okay. Now the Disney brought in the idea of inquisitors, so that kind of makes it a little muddy, but I mean, as far as I've seen, we don't have any knowledge of inquisitors being around in the sequel trilogy. So that means that Kylo, Snoke, and Palpatine are the only ones that are really embracing this darkness. Um, as far as
Does
Luke,
Luke have an unexplained power level?
I wouldn't say.
We see him start with basically nothing and work his booty off to get all this training done. You know,
And
between Obi-Wan and Yoda.
I would also go on to say that he trained for 4 years and he still wasn't like overly powerful. I would argue he's not overpowered. So I feel
So
like,
his power level is adequate for how much he trained.
right.
So our next one is, are they perfectly good? And so I think the best way to kind of interpret this to make it a little bit less ambiguous is, and I'm gonna go with a quote here, great shot, kid. That was one in a million. Do they seem to be like almost kind of perfect?
Okay, so you're not asking like, are they a light side character as in being good, just to clarify.
I would say no, this is not a light side versus dark side question, especially when you're thinking of, defining a Mary Sue across all genres where there's not a whole light side and dark side discussion. This is just, are they kind of perfect and without flaws?
Um,
And I'm gonna vote
uh,
Luke, yes.
you would vote for who?
Luke, yes.
Why?
Everything aside from his aunt and uncle dying, everything seems to kind of go right for him. How is he such an incredible pilot that he can make something that slim of a shot that you saw other teammates not be able to make?
They did explain that. Um, when he ever since he was a kid, he would be flying his T-16 back home, which is the that little toy ship that he plays with, and also it's the one that Kenobi supposedly gave him. He used that to shoot womp rats, for fun, which is kind of uh leads to bad things when you kill little animals growing up. But he argued, or he mentioned in the movie, that he grew up doing that, so he was used to shooting very, very small targets. So
I guess maybe we should rethink about trying to separate this from unexplained power levels. So it's not so much is there a reason as to how they're perfect, or is just are they perfect, yes or no?
I was gonna say
I
that
feel like he's pretty perfect.
I was gonna say he's not, because in episode 5, he believes that he's all good to go and he's gonna save his friends. And when he shows up at Cloud City, he gets his butt handed to him, and his friends weren't saved. A couple of them made it out, but not all of them. So I would kind of argue that he is not perfect.
Should we give him maybe like a half?
I'd give him a half. He's not like super flawed, but I wouldn't say he's perfect. Um,
What about
same
Anakin?
thing. Same thing with Anakin. We've seen, when he went in. Well, it was kind of Padme's fault, but they try to save Obi-Wan at Geonosis, and they end up getting captured. So they weren't perfect in that sense. Anakin, the one that I think, I don't know if you said you took it away or not, but he is not well received by all of his peers. I can tell you that.
We'll get to that later. We're keeping
Uh,
that one to discuss. So right now, are they perfect?
I would not say Anakin is perfect. He likes to believe that he is, but he's not. So maybe that's kind of the wrench in that argument. As far as Rey, I think this should be the alternative question. Did we see Rey fail at anything? Literally anything.
I am having a struggle thinking of something.
So am I. Trying to think. In The Force Awakens, there was nothing that she failed at. I mean, she tried to run away from Kylo and he caught her, but I wouldn't consider that a failure of something she was trying to do.
Yeah.
I mean, she got the upper hand on Kylo and sliced his face, so she definitely didn't fail there. In
She
the
was
last,
able to mind trick the guards.
and she was able to stop him from going in her mind. The Last Jedi, she was able to survive all the stuff with Snoke, and
I think at one point, I don't remember which film this is. I want to say it's the last one, so maybe I'm skipping ahead here, but doesn't she talk to Leia about how she's trying to talk to like the Force ghosts or talk to people of the Force and she can't, she just feels like she hears nothing,
yeah, she's like, "Speak to me, speak to me." They're not speaking to me. Not until the very end of the film where they do speak to her.
right?
So I would say that's a stretch
Yeah.
for failures.
Hey, you asked me to find anything. That's the best I got.
Yeah, I think that's the best we're gonna have. What's the next one?
This next one's kind of a weird one. No personality. So I'm gonna interpret this as there's not a whole lot to this character aside from progressing the plot and kind of just moving things along because they're so good at what they do, they just move the story along, and there's not a whole lot of substance to the character themselves.
I would argue that that is a no for all of them. I would say Anakin, he's definitely got a personality. He cracks jokes with Obi-Wan.
He's
And
got a love life.
I say he's married. Hello.
I
um,
mean, you could be married with no personality, but he
true,
shows
true.
his love.
Yeah, 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 he did. He had children. Um, Luke,
It's not what I meant, but all right.
Luke, he's got a personality. He's, just as witty. Um,
I want you to elaborate on Luke.
like he's able to joke back and forth with his peers. There's a couple of times in Empire where his partner that's with him for the Battle of Hoth, they're talking it up and um, passing some jokes between each other. I think he jokes around with R2 a little bit. I don't know. I feel like he has a little bit more personality than just being a stale character, so to speak.
I'm not saying he's stale because he still has purpose, but personality wise, I feel like he's pretty lacking. I feel like he should get a half. He can
But
make some jokes with some friends and whatnot, but throughout the films, it's a lot of to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing.
so we got Ray that's left. Well, to be fair, like we said, this all took place over just a year and a couple weeks. So Ray's character was literally shoved down our throats. Um, does she have personality? And I want to also emphasize here, this is not in reference to like Daisy Ridley's performance. It is strictly how the character was written, because I honestly think that Daisy Ridley grew and evolved with Rey. And I was like, I'm super excited that she's going to be in this new movie that's coming out because I thought she hit her best stride with The Rise of Skywalker. So just emphasizing it's not an actress versus character thing. But I would say with Rey, I mean, she's emphasized as being a nobody for most of the time that she's on film. So I almost wonder if she really doesn't have much of a personality.
To me, she really kind of mirrors Luke a lot, where it's to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And she's really just kind of there as um, I'm going to call it a plot vehicle. She's going from one section of the story to the next, and there's not a whole lot of social interaction.
I think that's considered a MacGyver. I think that's what it's called.
I have no idea.
Oh, I think that's what it's called. Uh,
I'm going to give her a full check. The last one we have is, are they instantly liked?
instantly liked.
And
Anakin?
I'm gonna say this could be both by their peers and as a character, like I really like this character in the movie, as us as the audience. I'm gonna go either way on this one. I think both should count.
Anakin, I would say no. He was not instantly liked by his peers. Um, he literally
Peers
was
really kind of
called.
hated him.
What's that?
I said most of his peers really hated him, except for
Yeah.
Obi.
Um,
And Obi-Wan, it kind of grew on him because he didn't even really want to train him. Not Mace Windu. Qui-Gon was the one who wanted to train him, right?
yeah. Like Obi-Wan literally calls him a pathetic life form, not to his face by any means, but he does mention it. So, um, yes, Obi-Wan's a little irritated by him at first, which, I mean, I don't know. If Obi-Wan is not a fatherly figure, I'm sure a 10-year-old isn't something that he wants just thrown on his lap. Um, but
What
yeah,
about Luke?
Anakin was not well received by his peers, even as he grew up, like you said, with Mace Windu and whatnot.
And actually, I'm gonna have us go with Ray first. We've always done her last. Let's talk about her character first, and we'll go back to Luke.
I think she was instantly liked by Finn. However, okay, I'm gonna throw a however in here. All right. I mean, when Finn first sees Rey, okay, Rey is an attractive character. He sees this attractive woman about to get beat up by these thieves, and then he just sees her handle them like like they were nothing. Okay, that's attractive. That might make someone really like this character right away. So I'm gonna give her a little bit of leeway on that because maybe Finn had a little bit of an attraction to her.
Would you say that's because she's perfect?
For him, maybe, I don't know. Well, he also hasn't known like an actual human, if that's the way to put it. His whole life he has known the First Order. Here he's seeing like the first human being, so to speak.
I
And
meant it more like I'm so perfect, I don't need a man to take care of things. I can take care of myself.
she does kind of act that way. Stop holding my hand, and yelling at him for all those little things. Or Hand is probably how she pronounced it. But yeah, I would say in the first movie she seems fairly perfect and beside herself. Uh, I would say Finn likes her. Han Solo happens to like her. Maz seems to like her.
Do you offering me a job?
I don't really think there's anybody that didn't like her, except for when we talked about, Poe later on at the final film where he's kind of bickering with her about her priorities.
Yeah. I don't know that's necessarily that he didn't like her. I think it's just more that he was annoyed.
Could be. Because he seemed to like her in The Last Jedi when he was like, or she said, "I'm Rey," and he was like, "I've heard," or "I know." I don't remember what he said, but he was happy to finally meet her.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say she gets the check mark on this as far as she is liked by everybody she runs into.
Instantly liked. What about Luke?
Luke, I'm just thinking of all the different interactions that he had. No, there's at least one. The guy that had the death sentence on 12 systems. Him and his buddy sure didn't like Luke at the bar, the cantina. I don't know. As far as like main characters, they're really. Oh, Han Solo kind of had a little bit of a beef with him at first because Luke seemed to, try to be in Han's business when he was flying, and he was like, "Watch yourself, or you find yourself floating home," kind of a thing. So I would argue that Luke was not liked by everybody right away. I'd say no.
Instantly liked.
Yeah, I would say no.
I feel like that's fair. I would almost kind of give him a half, but I think this is fair. With Obi-Wan, he doesn't really have a whole ton of time with Obi-Wan. They get along, but is he instantly liked versus just, civil? Eh. I mean, you could argue either way, I suppose. You think of like Han and Han wanting Leia and kind of thinking that Luke's almost kind of in his way. That's another reason why they're not necessarily instantly liking each other right off the bat. Leia seems to be all right with him, except this is some rescue.
Yeah, I think she was talking to Han for that, but
I thought she was referring to the group as a whole, but
yeah, them in general. So
yeah.
we explained this chart for quite a while. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the findings that we got from the chart and then discuss whether or not we believe that Rey is the Mary Sue that people keep talking about. So stay tuned. Have you ever wondered what it's like to grow up during the prequel era? Do you wonder what type of merchandise was around then? How different was it than it is now? Check out our videos on this channel where we talk about the merchandise of the Phantom Menace and the merchandise of Attack of the Clones. They are here on this channel. The Phantom Menace is my first video ever on YouTube, so there's a special place in my heart for that one. So please, if any, check that out. Now back to our show. Welcome back, everybody, for our final segment here of Is Rey a Mary Sue? We just talked about a handful of categories from a source that Sarah found that was kind of determining what kind of questions should we be thinking about when talking about Mary Sue type characters. And we analyzed these questions in reference to the three main characters from the three different trilogies of Star Wars. We talked about Anakin, Luke, and Rey. So based on how we answered the chart, Sarah, what are your findings?
So I'm gonna go in chronological order here. So starting with Anakin. Anakin did not meet any of the chart criteria. So we said he was not overpowered, he did not have an unexplained power level, he was not perfectly good or like instantly good at what he did, whatever it was. Um, for no personality, we said he did not meet that criteria. So he did have personality, and then he was not instantly liked. So he is not a Mary or a Gary Sue. So that is one main character, and I'm emphasizing that because when we talked about examples earlier, Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and then I don't remember what the third one was.
Third one was Luke.
Oh, Luke, yeah. So according to what we found online, those were all main characters. Here is Anakin, an example of a main character that was not a Mary Gary Sue. So the next one I'm going to talk about is Luke Skywalker. So we gave him 2 half check marks. So we said he was not overpowered. He did not have an unexplained power level. In terms of being perfectly good, we gave him kind of a half check there. And then same thing as a half check for having no personality or lacking personality. And then we said he did not fit the criteria of being instantly liked. So, out of 5 criterias and only getting 2 half check marks, it's like 1 out of 5. I would say that doesn't really qualify him as being a Mary or Gary Sue. That is a failing grade. So now we get on to Rey. So overpowered, we said yes. Unexplained power level, we gave her a half check mark there because they did kind of try to explain it, even though their explanation really wasn't that great. Was she perfectly good? We said yes. No personality, we said yes there. And was she instantly liked? We said yes there. So she has 4.5 out of 5 of these characteristics. I would say that qualifies her as being a Mary Sue.
Which is interesting because like before we talked about all this, I was kind of on the side of saying no, just because of kind of that thought process of, things were explained in the movies, but there's these other aspects of it as well. So once we take that into consideration, she probably is. So interesting.
I'm glad we were able to find a way to break it down further than just is she perfect at what she does and do people like her or not. I feel like this really kind of broke it down onto a more technical level and being able to do this kind of blind study because Jeremy didn't know what these different topics were ahead of time. Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. Just to compare for kicks and giggles, the website that I found this chart from, they gave Rey a 5 out of 5, so she definitely was a Mary Sue. For Anakin, he got 1.5 out of 5, and for Luke, he got 2 out of 5. So they did give more points to Luke, actually to all characters, more points than what we gave. But just going off of our own interpretations, I feel like we did a good job analyzing each of the characters.
Yeah, I would agree. Have to. It's our show. Yeah. So we went ahead, like I said, we talked about what was a Mary Sue. We talked about Rey in depth because she's probably the character that of those 3 that we don't remember much about just because of all the stuff that happens with the sequel trilogy. But I think it's important to put into perspective the time frames of when all this stuff happens. Again, Anakin probably was in training with the Force for 10 plus years. Luke was about 4 for his movies, and Rey for her trilogy was 1 year and some change. So I think that really emphasizes, at least from a power standpoint, because everybody's like, Jedi went through years and years of training and then they got, powerful, and Rey did not. And so, especially since in The Last Jedi, she happens to have, so much power, and that was within a couple weeks. So, anything else you wanted to say on the topic?
What was your reasoning again for before we looked at things more in depth why you thought she was not a Mary Sue?
I was just going off of the idea that, Snoke mentioned as darkness rises and light meets it, or maybe I have that backwards. Who knows? Basically, the two are always in balance, which is kind of interesting because, you know, throughout George Lucas's movies, there was always this talk about who is going to bring balance to the Force, and here we have Snoke saying that they're always in balance, kind of a thing, and that's why Rey got so powerful so quickly. So I
Yeah.
hate to say, but I think her character faltered because uh simply because of the mishandling by Disney. The one thing that the sequel trilogy did that the other trilogies did not is significantly shorten the time frame of the trilogy. The first two films were literally the same day. Like, so when the first movie ended, the next movie started on the same day as the first one ended, and then there was a small time gap for the next one. That has never happened for Star Wars ever until Disney took it over. So, I think that
I feel
attempt
like if they took her character and spread it out over some time, it would kind of level it out a bit more because
it definitely would.
instantly liked, that's kind of hard to not hit if your character's not like taking place in an instant. Like her time frame is so short that for anybody to like her, they kind of almost have to instantly like her.
Yeah, or else the movie doesn't progress.
Right. Which lines up with our Urban Dictionary definition of the character being so perfect that the world around her almost kind of doesn't make much sense.
Right.
So her other characters liking her instantly, it's not very realistic that everybody's going to like you right off the bat, but yet here they are.
Yeah, which is crazy because I remember when I was thinking about what The Last Jedi was going to be like before I saw it, I was thinking, like, we probably won't see all the years and all the time that she trained with Luke because, we have to go somewhere with the story. And I was actually hoping to not see the training in real time. I was hoping to see basically what we saw in the beginning of Rise of Skywalker, how she was doing her little obstacle course. I was hoping to see something like that for The Last Jedi and then move on and then maybe hear about her training in like flashbacks or something, and not just make the whole movie about training that they talked about and then we didn't see on film. That makes no sense. What they did. So yeah, that would definitely have made it better. It would have taken the argument away from the anti-Rey people saying she didn't train long enough. People wouldn't be able to say that. But yet Disney gave them the ammunition to be able to just rifle that off and say, well, she's not adequate because she didn't have the proper time of training. And then people can just instantly hate her. So all right. I think that's about it for Ray. So, according to our analysis, we would say yes, Ray is a Mary Sue. Interesting how our minds can be changed in just a little over an hour, because that's what happened to me. If you enjoy this type of video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We talk about Star Wars movies, shows, random topics like these where they're, big in the Star Wars fandom, and we want to analyze the different aspects of it so you can get our opinions. If you enjoy that, turn on notifications. If you enjoyed this video in particular, drop us a like and drop us a comment letting us know your thoughts on if Rey is a Mary Sue. Keep things civil in the comments, of course. It's a touchy subject, but it can be talked about in delicacy. And then, as always, everybody, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.